The blood-soaked dirt beneath Abigail Carson's knees told a story of desperation as she crawled away from the homestead she had once called her own. The evening sun cast long shadows across the Montana prairie, hiding the tears that streamed down her bruised face. 3 years of marriage to Samuel Thornton had culminated in this beaten and cast out like unwanted cattle, all because her womb remained empty. It was 1875 in Sweetwater Valley, Montana Territory, a place where a woman's worth was measured by the children she bore. At 26, Abigail had tried everything from special teas to prayers, but month after month, her courses came with merciless regularity, a reminder of her failure. "Don't come back until you can be a proper wife," Samuel had snarled, his alcohol-fueled rage giving way to a final, devastating blow that left her sprawled on the porch. Their neighbors had turned away, shuttered windows a silent acknowledgement of the common belief. A barren woman was worse than no woman at all. The setting sun offered little warmth as Abigail pulled herself to her feet, clutching the small bundle of belongings she'd managed to grab. Her ribs ached with each breath, but the pain of shame cut deeper. With nowhere to go and no family within 500 miles, she stumbled toward the road leading to town. "Madam, you all right there?" The deep voice startled her. She hadn't heard the horse approach, her ears still ringing from Samuel's blows. Abigail looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the darkening sky, sitting astride a chestnut mare. Instinctively, she shrank back. "I'm fine," she lied, trying to wipe away the blood from her split lip. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing a man in his early 30s with features weathered by sun and wind. His eyes, however, held a gentleness that made her pause. "The name's Ethan Lawson," he said, keeping a respectful distance. "I run the Broken Arrow Ranch about 10 miles west." He gestured to her face. "That doesn't look fine to me." Abigail lowered her gaze, shame burning her cheeks. "My husband believes a woman who can't bear children isn't worth keeping." Ethan's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "And where are you headed now?" "I don't know," she admitted, hating how small her voice sounded. "Town, I suppose, though what I'll do there." She trailed off, the reality of her situation crashing down around her. "Sweetwater's 5 miles that way," he said, gesturing down the road. "But night's falling, and there's a storm brewing." He glanced at the darkening clouds on the horizon. "My sister Rose lives at the ranch. You'd be welcome to stay until you figure things out." Abigail hesitated. Going with a strange man could lead to dangers worse than those she'd fled, but the first drops of rain were already starting to fall, and the thought of spending the night huddled beneath a tree made her decision easier. "Thank you," she said simply. Ethan helped her onto his horse with careful hands that betrayed no ulterior motive, then led them westward as the storm clouds gathered. Abigail sat stiffly in the saddle, each jolt sending pain through her bruised body. "He had no right," Ethan said suddenly, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. "No man has the right to treat a woman that way, no matter the reason." Abigail didn't respond. After years of Samuel's biting words and increasing violence, she'd come to believe, perhaps, he did have the right, that her barrenness was somehow a moral failing rather than a physical one. The Broken Arrow Ranch appeared as they crested a hill, a sturdy main house with smoke curling from the chimney, a large barn and corrals where horses moved restlessly in anticipation of the coming storm. As they approached, a woman with honey-colored hair emerged onto the porch, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern as they drew closer. "Ethan, who's this?" she called. "Rose, this is Mrs." He stopped, realizing he didn't know Abigail's name. "Abigail Carson," she supplied, using her maiden name. She couldn't bear to be Mrs. Thornton any longer. "But please call me Abigail." Rose helped her down from the horse, her eyes widening at the sight of Abigail's injuries. "Come inside. We need to get you cleaned up." The interior of the ranch house was warm and welcoming, with simple but comfortable furnishings. As Rose led Abigail to a chair by the fire, Ethan disappeared to tend to his horse. "Don't worry about my brother," Rose said, as if reading Abigail's thoughts. "He's got a good heart. Lost his wife to childbed fever 5 years back, but he's not bitter, just careful." Abigail felt a pang of sympathy, followed by a rush of shame. Here was a man who had lost not only his wife but presumably the child as well, and he hadn't turned cruel. Meanwhile, Samuel had been unable to bear the disappointment of her empty womb. Rose brought warm water and clean rags, gently cleaning the blood from Abigail's face. "Your husband did this," Abigail nodded, wincing as the cloth touched her split lip. "Because," Rose prompted gently. "Because after 3 years of marriage I've failed to give him children." The admission hurt more than her physical wounds. "He says I'm useless as a wife." Rose's hand stilled. "That's not how it works, you know. Sometimes it's the man who can't father children, and sometimes—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes it's just God's plan." Ethan returned as Rose was finishing, carrying a tray with 3 steaming mugs. "Made some coffee," he said, setting the tray on a small table. His eyes met Abigail's, and she saw no pity there, only a quiet anger that wasn't directed at her. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," he said. "We've got a spare room and Rose could use the company. I'm often out with the cattle." "I can't impose," Abigail began. "It's not imposing if you're invited," Rose interrupted with a smile. "Besides, I could use help around the house if you're willing. My hands aren't what they used to be." She flexed her fingers, which Abigail noticed were slightly gnarled with early arthritis. "I'd be happy to help," Abigail said, relief washing over her. The prospect of shelter and purpose, even temporarily, was more than she had dared hope for. That night, lying in a clean bed with her wounds tended and her stomach full, Abigail let her tears flow freely for the first time. She cried for the life she'd thought she would have, for the children she'd never held, and for the woman she'd become, one who flinched at loud noises and apologized for taking up space. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and she fell into a dreamless sleep. Morning came with pale sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment, Abigail was disoriented, expecting to hear Samuel's demanding voice. Instead, there was only the distant sound of chickens and the smell of coffee and frying bacon. She dressed in the clean clothes. Rose had lent her a simple blue dress that was a bit too large but infinitely better than her blood-stained garments. When she entered the kitchen, she found Rose at the stove and Ethan at the table, studying a ledger. "Good morning," Rose greeted cheerfully. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in years," Abigail admitted. "Thank you." Ethan looked up, his expression softening at the sight of her. The bruises on her face had darkened overnight, but the swelling had gone down. "Morning, Mrs. Carson." "Abigail, please," she said, taking a seat at his gesture. Breakfast was a simple but hearty affair: eggs, bacon, and biscuits with honey. Abigail ate with enthusiasm, realizing she couldn't remember the last time food had tasted so good. At Samuel's table, meals had been tense, often interrupted by his criticism or complaints. "I'll be heading into Sweetwater today," Ethan said as he finished his coffee. "Need to pick up some supplies. Is there anything you need, Abigail?" She shook her head, embarrassed. "I have no money." "That wasn't my question," he said gently. Abigail hesitated. "I left with almost nothing. Some clothes would be helpful. Write down your sizes for Rose. I'll see what Mrs. Peters at the general store can put together." He stood, grabbing his hat from a hook by the door. "And Abigail, if your husband comes looking for you, he won't find you here. I promise you that." After he'd gone, Abigail helped Rose with the dishes. "Your brother is very kind," she said. Rose smiled. "He's a good man. One of the best, lost himself for a while after Miriam died, but he found his way back." She handed Abigail a plate to dry. "Don't mistake his kindness for anything else, though. Ethan's heart is still healing." "I'm not looking for anything like that," Abigail assured her quickly. "My own marriage has proven I'm not suited for it." Rose's expression grew serious. "No, what you had wasn't a marriage. It was a prison. A real marriage is a partnership." As the days passed, Abigail fell into a rhythm at the Broken Arrow. She helped Rose with cooking, cleaning, and tending the kitchen garden. Her bruises faded, and with them, some of the constant fear she'd lived with. Ethan was often busy with ranch work, but at meals they would all sit together, and Abigail found herself looking forward to his quiet presence. A week after her arrival, Ethan brought news from town. "Thornton's been asking after you," he said over dinner, "telling everyone his wife ran off." Abigail's hand trembled, spilling a drop of stew onto the tablecloth. "I'm sorry," she murmured, automatically reaching to clean it. "Don't be," Ethan said firmly. "He's making himself look the fool." "Sheriff Thompson asked me directly if I knew where you were." She looked up sharply. "And I told him the truth, that I'd offered shelter to a woman in need, and that if her husband had concerns, he could speak to me directly." His eyes held hers. "I also told him about the state you were in when I found you." "Thank you," she whispered, overcome with gratitude. 2 months passed, and spring blossomed across the Montana prairie. Abigail's body had healed, but more importantly, something inside her was beginning to mend as well. She no longer apologized for every small mistake, and sometimes she even laughed a sound she'd almost forgotten she could make. One warm afternoon, she was hanging laundry when Ethan rode in from checking the far pastures. He dismounted, leading his horse toward the barn, then paused when he saw her. "Need a hand?" he called. Abigail smiled, shaking her head. "I've got it, thank you." He walked over anyway, taking a shirt from the basket and finding pins for it. "My mother always said laundry goes faster with company." They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes before Ethan spoke again. "You're looking well, Abigail." She felt a blush creep up her neck. "I feel well. Your home has been healing." "It's been good having you here," he said, his voice sincere. "Rose hasn't had this much energy in years." "I'm glad to be useful," Abigail replied, though a small part of her wished he might say he enjoyed her presence for other reasons. Ethan seemed to read something in her expression. "It's not just the help, you know. You've brought something back to this place, something that's been missing." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 3 riders were coming up the road to the ranch, and with a jolt of fear, Abigail recognized Samuel's stocky figure in the lead. "Get inside," Ethan said quietly, his hand moving instinctively to the pistol at his hip. "No," Abigail found herself saying. "I won't hide." 3 months ago she would have run, cowering from Samuel's rage, but something had changed within her. Ethan studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Stay behind me." Samuel and his companions, 2 men Abigail recognized as neighbors from near their homestead, reined in their horses in the yard. Samuel's face was flushed with anger or alcohol, possibly both. "There's my wayward wife," he sneered, dismounting. "Living in sin with a rancher while I'm left to manage alone." "That's not true," Abigail said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Mr. Lawson and his sister have offered me shelter, nothing more." Samuel spat on the ground. "A man doesn't take another man's wife into his home without expecting something in return." He took a step forward, but Ethan moved to block his path. "Mrs. Carson has been a guest in my home, under my sister's chaperonage," Ethan said, his tone dangerously calm. "You do well to mind your accusations, Thornton." Samuel's eyes narrowed. "She's my wife. I'm taking her home where she belongs." "No," Abigail said, stepping out from behind Ethan. "I'm not going back, Samuel." Samuel's face darkened with rage. "You barren bitch. You think anyone else would want you. Can't even do the one thing God made women for." Ethan's hand twitched toward his gun, but Abigail placed her hand on his arm, stopping him. "My worth isn't measured by whether I can bear children," she said, the words feeling right as they left her lips. "And I won't be beaten for something I can't control." "The law says you're my wife," Samuel growled. "You have no choice." "The law also says I can't beat my horse," Ethan countered. "Yet you think it's your right to beat your wife." One of Samuel's companions shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Sam, maybe we should—" "Shut up, Jenkins," Samuel snapped. He pointed a finger at Abigail. "I'll give you one chance to come home willingly." "Or what?" Ethan challenged. "You'll try to take her by force. In case you haven't noticed, you're outnumbered on my land." As if on cue, two of Ethan's ranch hands appeared from the barn, drawn by the commotion. They stood a respectful distance away, but their presence was a clear message. Samuel's face contorted with fury, but he was not foolish enough to start a fight he couldn't win. "This isn't over," he snarled, climbing back onto his horse. "She's still my wife in the eyes of God and the law." "Perhaps," Ethan acknowledged, "but she's under my protection now." The three men rode off, Samuel's back rigid with anger. As soon as they were out of sight, Abigail's legs gave way and she sank to the ground, shaking. Ethan crouched beside her, his hands hovering uncertainly. "Are you all right?" she nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The confrontation had drained her, but beneath the fear was a spark of something unfamiliar: pride. She had stood up to Samuel. She hadn't cowered. "Come on," Ethan said gently, helping her to her feet. "Rose will have some tea ready." That evening, after Rose had gone to bed, Abigail found Ethan sitting on the porch, staring out at the star-filled sky. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders against the cool night air and joined him. "Thank you," she said simply, "for standing up for me today." Ethan turned to look at her, his face half shadowed in the lantern light. "You stood up for yourself. I just backed you up." They sat in silence for a moment, the night sounds of the prairie surrounding them. "Did you mean what you said?" Ethan finally asked. "About your worth not being measured by children," Abigail considered the question. "I think I'm starting to believe it," she said honestly. "All my life I've been told a woman's purpose is to bear children, when I couldn't." She trailed off, the old pain surfacing. "It felt like I'd failed at the one thing I was supposed to do." "You know," Ethan said slowly, "after Miriam died, people told me I should remarry right away. Find a new wife to give me sons to inherit the ranch." He shook his head. "As if Miriam could be replaced, as if our marriage had only been about creating heirs." "What was it about then?" Abigail asked softly. Ethan's eyes met hers. "Partnership, friendship. Waking up each morning knowing someone chose to be by your side, not because they had to, but because they wanted to." He paused. "Children would have been a blessing, but they weren't the purpose of our marriage. Miriam was enough, just as she was." Abigail felt tears sting her eyes at words she'd never expected to hear from a man. "Samuel never saw it that way." "Then Samuel is a fool," Ethan said firmly. "You're enough just as you are, Abigail, children or no children." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who understood loss and resilience. Abigail found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by the warmth in his eyes. The spell was broken by a distant rumble of thunder. Ethan glanced at the horizon, where lightning flickered among gathering clouds. "Storm's coming," he said, standing and offering her his hand. "We should get inside." As Abigail took his hand, she felt the calluses on his palm, evidence of honest work and a gentle strength. Their fingers lingered together a moment longer than necessary before they both stepped inside, closing the door against the approaching tempest. The following weeks brought changes to the Broken Arrow. With spring in full bloom, ranch work intensified. Ethan and his hands were busy from dawn till dusk with calving season, while Abigail and Rose expanded the kitchen garden and preserved early vegetables. Samuel had not returned, but his threat lingered like a storm on the horizon. Abigail knew he wouldn't simply accept her departure. Men like Samuel didn't relinquish what they considered their property without a fight. One afternoon, Abigail rode with Ethan to check on a new calf that had been born the previous day. The ride gave her a chance to see more of the Broken Arrow's land, rolling hills dotted with wildflowers, stands of cottonwoods along a creek, and in the distance, the snow-capped peaks of the mountains. "It's beautiful," she said as they paused atop a ridge overlooking the valley. "You've built something wonderful here." Ethan smiled, pride evident in his expression. "My father started it. I've just tried to build on his work." He pointed to a meadow in the distance. "That's where I'd like to build a new house someday. The old one's getting crowded with all the hands we've taken on." Abigail tried to ignore the pang she felt at the implication that someday he might marry again, might build a home for a new wife. It wasn't her place to feel jealousy or disappointment. She was still a married woman, even if only in name. They found the calf and its mother in a sheltered hollow, both healthy and strong. As they watched, the calf nursed vigorously, its tail flicking with contentment. "Life finds a way," Ethan mused, "even in the harshest conditions." Abigail thought about her own life, how she had survived Samuel's cruelty, how she was slowly finding herself again at the Broken Arrow. "Yes," she agreed, "it does." Their return to the ranch was interrupted by the sight of a rider approaching from the direction of town. As they drew closer, Abigail recognized Sheriff Thompson, his silver badge catching the afternoon sun. Ethan tensed beside her. "Stay calm," he murmured. "Let me do the talking." The sheriff tipped his hat as they met in the yard. "Afternoon, Lawson, Mrs. Thornton." Abigail flinched at the name. "Sheriff," she acknowledged. "I'm afraid I'm here on official business," Thompson said, his expression grave. "Mr. Thornton has filed a complaint, says you've taken his wife against her will, Lawson." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's a lie, and you know it, Sheriff. Mrs. Carson came here of her own accord after her husband beat her half to death." Thompson sighed, removing his hat to run a hand through his thinning hair. "I know what I saw when she came into town with you that day, all bruised up, but the law's the law." "A husband has certain rights to beat his wife," Ethan interrupted, his voice sharp. "Of course not," Thompson said, looking uncomfortable. "But to expect her to live under his roof, yes, that's his right." Abigail stepped forward. "Sheriff, I left because I feared for my life. Samuel beat me because I haven't been able to conceive a child. He'll do it again if I return." Thompson looked genuinely sympathetic. "I understand, madam, but without proof of ongoing danger, I can't prevent a man from claiming his wife. Judge Parker's issued papers. You need to return with your husband, or Lawson here could face charges for harboring you." "This is absurd," Ethan growled. "It's the law," Thompson said apologetically. "Thornton will be coming to collect Mrs. Thornton tomorrow. I thought you should have some warning." He replaced his hat. "For what it's worth, I don't agree with how he's handled this. But my job is to uphold the law, not make it." After the sheriff rode away, Abigail stood frozen, terror washing over her. The thought of returning to Samuel made her physically ill. "I won't let him take you," Ethan said, his voice low and determined. "We'll figure something out." Rose was equally adamant when they told her the news. "You can't go back to that monster," she declared. "There must be a way." They spent the evening discussing options. Ethan suggested Abigail could go farther west, perhaps to Oregon or California, where Samuel couldn't find her. Rose thought they might appeal to the circuit judge who would arrive in 2 weeks' time. "What if?" Abigail said hesitantly. "What if I simply divorced him?" Ethan and Rose exchanged glances. "Divorce isn't easy to obtain," Ethan explained gently. "Especially for a woman. You'd need to prove extreme cruelty, and even then it could take months or years. And in the meantime, I'd be forced to live with him," Abigail concluded, her heart sinking. They fell into troubled silence, the ticking of the mantel clock marking the passage of time they didn't have. Finally, Ethan spoke. "There's another option," he said slowly. "It's unorthodox, but it might work." "What is it?" Abigail asked, willing to consider anything. "Marriage," he said, meeting her startled gaze. "To me." Rose gasped. "Ethan, what are you saying?" "Hear me out," he continued. "If Abigail were already married to someone else, Thornton's claim would be void. We could claim that she was already divorced from him when she came here, and that we married shortly after." "But that would be a lie," Abigail protested, even as her heart raced at the suggestion. "Yes," Ethan acknowledged, "but sometimes a lie serves justice better than the truth. The alternative is sending you back to a man who might kill you next time." "It wouldn't be a real marriage," Rose clarified, studying her brother's face. "Just a legal arrangement to protect Abigail." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes, disappointment perhaps. "Of course," he said. "Unless—" He trailed off, then shook his head. "No, you're right, just a legal arrangement." Abigail's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. The practical solution Ethan offered would save her from Samuel, but the thought of a marriage in name only to a man she'd grown to care for deeply brought its own kind of pain. "I can't ask you to do this," she said finally. "It's too much." "You're not asking. I'm offering," Ethan replied. "And I'm not doing it out of pity or obligation. I'm doing it because—" He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "Because I care what happens to you, Abigail, more than I should, perhaps." The air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Rose cleared her throat. "Well, I think I'll turn in early," she said, standing with a knowing smile. "You two have details to work out." After Rose left, Abigail and Ethan sat in awkward silence. The crackling fire provided the only sound in the room. "It doesn't have to be permanent," Ethan finally said. "Once Thornton gives up, or we can secure a proper divorce for you, we could end our arrangement." Abigail looked down at her hands. "And if I didn't want it to end?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Ethan's head snapped up. "What?" "These past months," she began, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. "I've come to care for you, Ethan, deeply. I never expected to feel this way again, or perhaps I never truly felt it before, but the thought of marrying you, even as a ruse—" She lifted her eyes to his. "It doesn't feel like a hardship." Ethan moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. "Abigail, I've been fighting my feelings because you came here needing safety, not a man imposing his attentions on you, and because I thought my heart died with Miriam." His thumbs traced gentle circles on her palms. "I was wrong. If we do this, I don't want it to be just for show. I want a real chance with you." Tears filled Abigail's eyes. "Even knowing I might never give you children," Ethan's expression softened. "You're enough just as you are," he repeated, the words a balm to her wounded spirit. "Children would be a blessing, but they're not a requirement for happiness. You are what matters to me." Tentatively, he leaned forward, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, Abigail closed the distance between them. their lips meeting in a gentle kiss that held the promise of healing and new beginnings. When they separated, both slightly breathless, reality intruded once more. "Samuel comes tomorrow," Abigail reminded him. "Even if we decide to marry, we don't have time." Ethan smiled, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "Then we'll have to be creative. Do you trust me?" "With my life," she replied without hesitation. "Then we have work to do." The following morning dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself was conspiring against the gravity of the day. Abigail wore her best dress, one Ethan had purchased for her in town, and Rose had helped her arrange her hair. If she was to face Samuel again, she would do so with dignity. Ethan had ridden out at first light, telling her only that he had a plan and to trust him. She did, with a completeness that would have frightened her just months ago. Around mid-morning, the sound of approaching horses announced Samuel's arrival. Abigail stood on the porch, Rose at her side for support. Samuel rode in with Sheriff Thompson, and another man Abigail didn't recognize, likely a witness to ensure she left willingly. Samuel's face bore a triumphant sneer as he dismounted. "Time to come home, wife," he called. "I trust you've learned your lesson about running off." Abigail lifted her chin. "I'm not coming with you, Samuel." His expression darkened. "The law says different. Sheriff's got the papers right there." Thompson looked uncomfortable but nodded. "Mrs. Thornton, I'm afraid you don't have much choice in the matter." "Actually," came Ethan's voice as he rode into the yard with several other riders, "she does." Abigail's heart leapt at the sight of him, but her confusion grew as she recognized the others with him: Reverend Collins from the church in Sweetwater, Judge Wilson, who occasionally held court in the larger towns, and two other men she didn't know. "What's the meaning of this, Lawson?" Samuel demanded. Ethan dismounted smoothly, helping the elderly judge down as well. "Sheriff, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Mrs. Carson isn't Mrs. Thornton any longer." "What are you talking about?" Samuel sputtered. Judge Wilson stepped forward, his dignified presence commanding attention. "Mr. Thornton, I presided over your divorce from Abigail Carson 3 months ago. Don't you recall signing the papers?" Samuel's face reddened. "That's a lie. We were never divorced." One of the unknown men, dressed in a lawyer's suit, produced a document from his satchel. "The paperwork says otherwise, Mr. Thornton. Signed and witnessed, citing extreme cruelty as grounds." Sheriff Thompson took the document, examining it with a frown. "This looks official, Thornton." "It's a forgery," Samuel shouted. "She's my wife." "No," Ethan said firmly. "She's mine." He moved to stand beside Abigail, taking her hand. "We were married 2 weeks ago by Reverend Collins here. Isn't that right, Reverend?" The Reverend, a kindly man with white hair, nodded solemnly. "Indeed." A beautiful ceremony, if small. Abigail struggled to keep her expression neutral, amazed at the elaborate deception Ethan had orchestrated. The documents were clearly forgeries, and the Reverend was lying, but they were all so convincing that even she almost believed it. Samuel lunged forward, grabbing for Abigail. "You whore! You think you can?" He never finished the sentence. Ethan's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling in the dirt. "That's my wife you're speaking to," Ethan said, his voice deadly quiet. "Insult her again and you'll lose more than your dignity." The sheriff stepped between them, hands raised. "Now hold on, everyone. Let's sort this out calmly." He examined the divorce papers again, then looked at the marriage certificate the lawyer produced. "These seem to be in order, Thornton. If you've got evidence to the contrary, you'll need to present it in court." Samuel scrambled to his feet, spitting blood. "This isn't over," he hissed. "I'll prove these are forgeries." "You're welcome to try," the judge said mildly. "But I have a clear recollection of the proceedings, as do these witnesses." "A court case would only embarrass you further." revealing why Mrs. Lawson had grounds for divorce in the first place. The implication was clear: Samuel's abuse would become public knowledge, damaging his standing in the community. He looked from the judge to the sheriff, then to Ethan and Abigail standing united on the porch. "Keep the Barren bitch," he finally spat. "She wasn't worth the trouble anyway." He mounted his horse clumsily, his movements jerky with rage. "You deserve each other." They watched him ride away, the sheriff following after a tip of his hat and an apologetic glance. Only when they were out of sight did Abigail turn to Ethan. "How did you manage all this?" she asked in wonder. Ethan smiled. "Judge Wilson owes me a favor. I saved his grandson from drowning last year. The lawyer is actually my friend Michael, who runs the saloon in Helena." He grew serious. "The documents won't hold up to real scrutiny, but they don't need to. Samuel won't risk the humiliation of a court case." "And the marriage certificate?" Abigail asked softly. Reverend Collins stepped forward, a kind smile on his face. "That part could be real, my dear, if you wish it. I did bring my Bible and registry." Ethan took both of Abigail's hands in his. "I meant what I said last night. I want this to be real, not just a protection against Samuel, but a true marriage. But only if that's what you want too." Rose appeared at Abigail's side, squeezing her shoulder encouragingly. "It's your choice, dear. No one will force you this time." Abigail looked at Ethan, this man who had rescued her, respected her, and shown her what true partnership could be. The answer was simple. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "I want to marry you, Ethan Lawson." The ceremony took place right there on the porch of the Broken Arrow Ranch, with the Montana sky stretching endlessly above them and wildflowers dancing in the spring breeze. Rose stood as Abigail's witness, tears of joy in her eyes, while Michael served as Ethan's best man. "Do you, Ethan Lawson, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Reverend Collins asked. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" "I do," Ethan said, his eyes never leaving Abigail's. "And I promise to remember always that you are enough, just as you are." When Abigail's turn came, her voice shook with emotion. "I do," she said, "and I promise to be the partner you deserve in all things." "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Collins pronounced, "I now declare you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Ethan drew her into his arms, his kiss tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. When they separated, the small gathering applauded, and even Judge Wilson wiped a suspicious moisture from his eye. "Mrs. Lawson," Ethan murmured, testing the name. "Mr. Lawson," Abigail replied with a smile. "My husband." The celebration continued into the evening, with Rose preparing a feast and the ranch hands joining in with music and dancing. As twilight descended, Ethan led Abigail away from the revelry to the quiet of the garden. "Are you happy?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she answered honestly. "But Ethan, you should know I've seen doctors before. They all said the same thing. Children may never—" He silenced her with a gentle finger to her lips. "I married you, Abigail, not the possibility of children. If they come, they'll be a blessing. If not, we'll still have a full life together." "How can you be so certain?" she asked, the old fear still lingering. "Because I've seen the way you bring life to everything you touch," he said. "The garden flourishes under your care. Rose smiles more than she has in years. Even the most skittish colt in the stable lets you approach." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Our home will be filled with love, Abigail. That's what makes a family, not simply blood." She leaned into his embrace, allowing herself to believe in the future he described. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. I think I have since that first night when you said no man had the right to treat a woman the way Samuel treated me." "I love you too," he replied, the words a vow as sacred as those they'd exchanged before the reverend. "And I will every day for the rest of our lives." Their kiss sealed the promise, the stars emerging above them like witnesses to the new life beginning at the Broken Arrow Ranch. In the years that followed, the Broken Arrow prospered under Ethan and Abigail's joint care. They built the new house Ethan had envisioned, a spacious home with wide porches and many bedrooms just in case, he'd said with a wink, though they both accepted the possibility that those rooms might remain empty of children. Rose continued to live with them, her arthritic hands finding relief in the warm springs Ethan discovered on their property. She became known throughout the territory for her medicinal teas and healing salves, passing her knowledge to Abigail, who developed her own skill with herbs and remedies. 2 years into their marriage, the unexpected happened. What began as fatigue and morning sickness was confirmed by the doctor in Sweetwater. Abigail was with child. The pregnancy was difficult, with several frightening moments when they feared they would lose the baby. But in the spring of 1878, Thomas Lawson came into the world, a healthy boy with his father's eyes and his mother's determination. "A miracle," Abigail whispered, cradling her son while Ethan sat beside them on the bed, his arm protectively around his family. "No," Ethan corrected gently. "A blessing, but not a validation. You were always enough, Abigail, child or no child." Thomas was followed 3 years later by a daughter, Emma Rose, completing their family in a way Abigail had once believed impossible. Yet even in her joy as a mother, she never forgot the truth Ethan had taught her, that her worth was inherent, not dependent on her ability to bear children. Samuel Thornton eventually left Montana, heading to the Dakota Territory after losing his homestead to gambling debts. The last they heard, he had remarried and divorced twice more, his bitterness growing with each failed relationship. Abigail felt only pity for him, the fear he'd once inspired washed away by the love that surrounded her. On their 10th anniversary, Ethan surprised her with a locket containing miniature portraits of their children. As he fastened it around her neck, he whispered, "I thank God every day for bringing you to me." "Even though I arrived bruised and broken?" she asked, leaning back against his chest as they watched Thomas and Emma playing in the meadow below their home. "Especially then," he said, "because it showed me your strength. You survived, Abigail. You rebuilt yourself from the ashes of what he tried to destroy." She turned in his arms, touching his face with a tenderness born of years of trust and partnership. "We built this life together," she corrected. "Equal partners, just as you promised." As the sun set over the Montana prairie, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Ethan kissed his wife with the same devotion as on their wedding day. Around them, the Broken Arrow thrived, cattle grazing on the hillsides, horses running in the pastures, and their home a beacon of warmth in the growing community. That night, lying in each other's arms, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from a beaten woman crawling away from cruelty to the confident mistress of a prosperous ranch, beloved wife and mother. The path had been neither straight nor easy, but each step had led her home. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "How words can heal as well as hurt," she replied. "When you told me I was enough just as I was, it changed something fundamental inside me. It gave me permission to believe in my own value." "I only spoke the truth," he said, "and I'll keep speaking it for the rest of our days." As sleep claimed them, Abigail held tight to the knowledge that had saved her, that love wasn't about possession or production, but about seeing the true worth in another soul and cherishing it. In Ethan's eyes, she had always been enough, and in that certainty, she had found the courage to become more than she'd ever dreamed possible. The Broken Arrow Ranch stood as testament to their shared vision, a place where value wasn't measured by traditional standards, but by the love that filled every corner. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy they could leave their children, the understanding that each person was enough, exactly as they were.